Hey, legal rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do. In this episode, I interview Hannes Westermann, a brilliant young PhD and professor of law and AI, who represents the next generation AI native lawyer using technology to open access to justice. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host, and my guest today is of a new generation of lawyer who is a native AI lawyer. And what I mean by that is that he encapsulates the best of being a lawyer and also being knowledgeable about artificial intelligence. He is a professor at Maastricht University in AI and the law, and he has so many accomplishments under his belt. His research focuses on using generative AI to improve access to justice. He wrote his PhD thesis about that. He got his PhD from the University of Montreal and the Cyberjustice lab there. He created this bot called JusticeBot, which has helped over 40,000 people already. His name is Hannes Westermann, and I'm so excited to have him here today. So with that, Hannes, if you don't mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for this very kind introduction. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so just recently arrived in Maastricht here. So I'm the assistant professor at the Faculty of Law here in the Law and Tech Lab, which is run by Professor Gijs van Dijk. So I'm working there as an assistant professor. And my research is essentially now exploring how generative AI can be used in the legal field, what it can do and what it can't do, and especially with a big focus on access to justice. So understanding how can help people who may not have access to lawyers or who may not understand their legal issues, how we can help them out and give them better access to the legal system.
And I would point out too that another of your accomplishments is that your paper that you wrote about using AI for access to justice also got the Best Paper Award at Jurix in 2020 and 2023.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so let's start a little bit with that. So what was the focus of that paper and what were you exploring?
Sure. So the paper in 2023, I guess, is the most relevant here. So yeah. That was well, that kind of connects to the other project I've been working on, the JusticeBot, which was the big project of my PhD research. And there, the idea was to build this platform that is online where people can go and interact with the system, and it will give them legal information. And maybe we'll get a chance to discuss that later as well. But this system, due to a number of reasons, this was based on the symbolic AI approach. So it's a deterministic logic. It's a kind of very it's very easy to see what kind of answers it will give, depending on what kind of information the user provides. And we built this first version in the domain of landlord-tenant disputes, and that's the one we deployed in Quebec. But here, so the idea is it uses symbolic AI, which is great, is very powerful for many things, but can also take quite a long time to build. So kind of sitting there manually encoding these pathways, even though we made it as easy as possible, still takes some time. So what we explored in 2023 in this paper that got the Best Paper Award was maybe this is something generative AI can help with. So the idea was we have the JusticeBot, it's working, it's online already, but how can we use kind of generative AI to enhance that? And so what we tried was, what is if we give generative AI, GPT-4, a legal article, and we tell it, use this to build this kind of pathway that we use in the JusticeBot. So essentially convert this kind of legal text, this legal article, into this the structured logical representation that can serve the basis of a JusticeBot tool. And we evaluated that. We tried 40 legal articles and then compared it to some manually encoded articles that our human annotators have done. And we found that it did really well. So it wasn't always perfect. Like there was still some times where the model got confused. But even so, the fact that it got it mostly right is something that we thought we could leverage, because this could then work in combination with the human annotator, the legal expert. So they could go in there, they could look at the pathway and be like, this is correct, but this we need to fix. they could update it and verify that it's correct, and then like that get an increased efficiency in creating these legal pathways. So I think that's a quite exciting result, especially, and this is one of my favorite results here, is that we could see that in some instances, the AI actually helped the human annotator realize mistakes in their own reasoning. So they looked at the pathway generated by the AI and they were like, yeah, that looks right. I actually misunderstood this particular thing. And so overall, this kind of combination between human experts and a legal AI and generative AI, I think is very exciting, which is what I try to show in that paper.
And I totally agree. It's very exciting. And the fact that you have taken it on as, you know, your life's work right now is, I think, commendable, because it's something that stands to help a lot of people, and the new way that it could scale up and help is just amazing. So one thing I want to kind of reel us back and rewind a little bit. I think you provided an amazing teaser that we can get into more detail about, but I'd like to learn more, as I do with all my guests, about your motivations and what got you interested in this field. Now, when I was preparing to interview you, I mean, it seems like from the very, very early on, you had this, you know, motivation and interest in this crossover between law and technology. I mean, when you were at in Luxembourg, right? That even then you were, I think, the head pupil on this committee for information and communication technology. Tell us a little bit about that. What was that committee and what were you doing there?
Yeah, sure. No, that was a long time ago. But I guess like always growing up, and this comes from home as well, from interests from my dad and my parents, was like I was very interested in technology. So just like playing with these computers. I got into programming when I was 11 or 12 or so, just because I thought it seemed so cool, and my dad helped me out with that as well. And I always was kind of fascinated by the potential of it to help people, essentially. I think like how it could be used and to empower and to help people in different ways. And so, of course, when there was the opportunity to go for the pupils committee at the European School in Luxembourg, I took that. Yeah, and my folks, that was the same, kind of see how I could get a better Wi-Fi connection for students, these kind of questions. So that was definitely part of my interest there as well.
And then from there, I think you took a year at McGill.
Yeah, so after the European School of Luxembourg, I went to Sweden to study law. So it was a big choice for me, like, should I go for law or engineering? And in the end, it was I ended up going for law in Sweden because it was a topic that really interested me. And both my parents are lawyers as well, so that helped me kind of get an insight into that field, which looked very fascinating. I think initially the idea was that I would do law for a bit, see how I liked it, and then maybe switch to engineering because I was missing a course that I needed to take after that. But in the end, I enjoyed law a lot as well. It was just a really cool field, I thought, very interesting. And so I stuck with it, did my law degree in Sweden for 5 years. And during these 5 years, I had the opportunity to go to McGill University in Montreal on exchange, which I thought would be 1 year, but ended up being leading to a lot longer stay in Montreal than that.
When you said that you learned programming, were you self-taught or did you take any courses in that?
No, I was self-taught. I think I just expressed interest to my dad, who's also very techie and very interested in these topics, and then he helped me set up the environment. So I think it was actually a C64 emulator that he put on my computer at the time, and then he just gave me some material, and then I started getting into it. I remember it didn't allow me to save my program, so I had to restart the process every time I started. But it was fun. I enjoyed it a lot, like the puzzle that came with it. I really appreciated, and that kind of led over my high school period to first work on that, writing some programs for fun, but then I also made some small apps, some games, and put them on the App Store, again just for fun, but it was a really cool experience to see that you could build something like that and put it out there for people to interact with.
And just there's a little insider baseball there. C64 stands for Commodore 64, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you were not just learning it theoretically, but that you were actually putting it into practice in programs. And I think actually the fact that it cleared the memory at the end probably made you commit a lot more to your own memory, which was probably pretty useful. But that you took things from the very beginning in the abstract programming, putting it into an actual program, and then putting it out into the world, because you can only really learn once you get it out there in the wild.
Absolutely agree. And I think like many of my things have been stuff where I started off doing something small. I was like, I want to just try, see what happens, see if this works. And then I realized it does work to some extent. And then I feel like this is something I want to share. Like I want to put it out there. I want not just me to be able to use it, but other people as well, which takes a lot of work, right? Like doing something that's a prototype compared to doing something that is open for other people to use is a big process and usually takes a lot more time. But the few times I've gone that far, I mean, I have many projects too that are unfinished. But when I do that, I feel like it often can lead to really interesting results. And I mean, seeing people interact with this stuff has always been super super cool and super inspiring for me as well to continue working on these things, I think.
Well, let me ask you a question. It might be a little unfair because it's been a while, but when you put any of those games out there on that store, do you remember like, do you have any memories of maybe some feedback that you got from users where you're like, I never would have thought of that. Why are they using it that way? Or like, was there anything useful or educational that you got from that?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it was a long time ago. I think it wasn't like a big thing at the time. Like there weren't that many people using these apps. But I remember being very impressed with how far they took it. Many of these were, so there was one game where you could like, it was called Crazy Snail. So you would be a snail that would jump over stones as far as possible. And as a developer, I thought like, I must be one of the better people playing this, and I did play, of course, to test it and to get it to run. But later, I spoke to people, and I heard from people that were much better than me at it. So I think that was a cool thing because in a way it meant I could build something or a tool that then other people could take much further than me. So I was kind of providing them with something in a way that they could take further, and that's something I think I really enjoyed and. I don't know. I feel like many of my things also now in my research, I try to do in that way where like I build a platform, I build something that I can give to people and then allow them to take these things really far.
I think that's a wonderful lesson. I mean, technology, and once we put it out in the world, it's kind of on its own. Like, people can interpret it however they want to. They could put it into practice in many different ways that we might not anticipate. And so having that experience early on, I think, is a good lesson to have. So the thing that I just find so amazing is that, and that's why I said at the top of this that you're one of this new generation, I believe, of lawyers that is not just a lawyer, but infused with a background in AI, because that was actually what you made, the focus of your law degree and your education after that. Like the fact that you got a PhD in the law, but it was focused in artificial intelligence. How did that come about? Did you have to push for that, or was that something they already offered?
Yeah, so it was kind of a very lucky moment, I think. So I was in Montreal at the time at McGill University, and while I was there, I saw this event called the Hack Justice Hackathon. So it was this event where you go and there were these tasks, and you were supposed to put together like a pitch with a team, and then pitch it to a jury of people. So I did that. I worked with a good friend of mine now. We put together this project and then showed it to a jury. And this was organized by a research lab called the Cyberjustice Laboratory. And so I ended up winning this hackathon. And that kind of started this whole process for me. So after that, the lab approached me. They said they liked my profile, they liked my work. So they asked me to work through the summer. And after that, they reached out to me to see whether I would consider doing a PhD with them. And this lab is, I think, one of the few places, so the Cyberjustice Laboratory at University of Montreal, that really has this very interdisciplinary focus. So there's lawyers working side by side with engineers, and that for me was and is now in Maastricht as well a very, very good environment, because I think that's really where my having these two sides, having my legal education, but also this interest in programming and AI really, really helped. So from that perspective, it was very natural. This was really the kind of research they're doing, and they were really open for me to kind of explore these very hands-on questions with how to build it, not just explore the AI system, but also implement concrete AI systems and see what they could do.
I love how organic it was. That you engaging with the lab actually led to the PhD, which had the focus of the very thing that you were working on. Okay, so let's dive a little bit more into the JusticeBot.
Mm-hmm.
If you can give like a kind of a quick overview of what it is, like what physically people would see if they engaged in it?
Sure, yeah, and you can do that right now if you want. So if you go to the website, justicebot.ca, there is a kind of this back and forth interface. So first there'll be a disclaimer explaining what the system does and explaining what it can do. And so the current version that we've deployed there is called, is focused on landlord-tenant disputes. So it explains, and we were very lucky there to be working actually with the Housing Tribunal in Quebec and with financing from the Ministry of Innovation and Education in Quebec as well. And so it explains that it can help in certain cases for landlords and tenants if they have a housing disputes. And once they click further on that, they're given this screen that asks them questions. So it asks them first, are you a landlord or your tenant? Let's say they select that they're a landlord. It would give a kind of a menu of different options that they have. So different legal issues. Some of them might be related to lateness of rent payment, or the tenant wanted to leave earlier. And then there's the equivalent for the tenant side as well, with issues like that the landlord wants to raise my rent, or they want to throw me out, or the apartment is not in a good state. And then you would select one of those options. It is in French currently for Quebec. Then the system would kind of drill deeper into your issue. So it might ask you questions about what has happened specifically. Has this occurred? Have you informed your landlord? And for any question where there's kind of uncertainty, like you're not quite sure, it would give you examples from case law. So it would say, here's how this was previously decided. Like, for example, if the question is your tenant frequently late in paying the rent, there'll be example where like, yeah, if it's more than 5 times over 12 months or more than 7 times, that's probably frequently late. So you can click yes here. Once you've answered a few questions like that, the system gives you kind of information. So it gives you legal information of what your rights might be. And then it gives you some possible next steps you could do. And those steps could be to speak to an attorney, to speak to a lawyer. It could be to reach out to the other party, try to find a peaceful settlement, or it could go to file a claim with the court. And so the idea is here that the people can really go from not knowing anything about the situation of something just having happened to really be better informed, to understand what the law says about situations similar to theirs, and to understand what next steps they might have to resolve this issue.
Wow. Okay, a lot to unpack there. Of course, one obvious thought that I think that might occur to a lot of lawyers that are watching this, because the audience consists of, there are some technical computer background people, but a lot of lawyers and law firms too. You know, the thought about the unlawful practice of law, and the thought of like, is this legal advice or is it legal information? I was wondering, you know, there's different ways of handling that. How did you handle that on this project?
Sure, that's a really good question. And so this project, to be clear, that was kind of a project I did at the Cyberjustice Lab, and it also ended up being my PhD thesis. So that's what I wrote about. And so this approach really took a couple of iterations. It took some time to think, like, how would this work? The idea was always to be able to put something online that people could actually use. And that kind of shaped, I think, this framing of that tool. And so in the end, the approach we took is to say that this tool should not try to predict the case of the user, and it should never tell them what they should do. What it should do is inform the user. So we always see this as kind of augmented intelligence instead of artificial intelligence, where we try to give context to the user, try to give them more information to allow them to make a better decision. And so that it is expressed in the fact that instead of telling the user, okay, we think the tenant is frequently late, we give them examples of case law, like a casebook would do. And we tell them, you need to decide this. We also never tell them this law is applicable, you have this right. We tell them, based on the situation you described to us, you may have this right, and here are some possible next steps you can undertake to resolve that. And so the idea here is, rather than acting like a lawyer telling them what they should be doing, is really acting more like a search engine or a casebook that kind of describes the legal area, allows them to get a better understanding then. And based on this understanding, the idea is that the user would take it further and have just better idea of how to make the decision. And often I think the decision might be, I'm going to speak to a lawyer now. Like, I realize there is this right that may be applicable in my situation. So it's time to speak to a lawyer to see if I can enforce this right.
I think that's a great way to handle it. as you know, the concept of what is the unlawful practice of law, at least in the United States, is what I'm most familiar with, is all over the place. You have practically 50 different definitions of it, and most of them are opaque. Actually, all of them are opaque and ambiguous, and potentially constitutionally vague. But that's an argument for another day. I think the fact that you kind of boiled it down to two things that I identify. One is prediction, right? So giving some kind of thought about how things would play out according to the legal analysis in the future, or how some decision maker would rule on it. So prediction. And then on the other hand, the advice being distilled as what you should do. So an actual recommendation amongst a universe of options about which option you should take. That makes a lot of sense. So you have prediction, I guess recommendation. Just so that I recap it and get it correctly, you would provide them the information with a number of options, and then the user makes their choice.
Right. Yeah, that's the idea. And I think so many people, like based on my research, so many lay people struggle with the fact of even knowing that they have a legal situation, right? Like something has happened, but it's kind of making this threshold or crossing this gap between, oh, here's something that happened to me, like I have a water leak, or I got this letter, to there is some legal right involved here. There's a law, is a really big gap. And being able to make that connection is really not easy, and something I think that in itself can be super helpful. Like even if you don't tell them, you definitely have this right, or this is what you should be doing, just informing them, look, there is this right that tenants have in some situations. And if this may be applicable to you, it sounds like it could be applicable to your situation, but you now need to decide. You need to figure out if that's actually the case, and you need to decide what the next steps for you are. But just knowing that they have that option, and that could be speaking to a legal aid clinic, or speaking to a lawyer, or going to court, or even going to the other party. And I think like that's often a great outcome as well. If they can be like, okay, I think I have this right here. I'm going to go speak to my landlord or my tenant, discuss this with them in light of knowing more about this kind of right, and then hopefully coming to a solution that's positive for both of us.
I completely agree. And I think that, if you've gone to any conference on access to justice, which I'm sure you've gone to hundreds of them at this point, probably, one of the main topics discussed is that people don't know that it's a legal issue, or they don't know what their legal rights are. And so helping them to identify that, it's a critical gap, I think, between the thinking of real people, so to speak, and lawyers. Not that lawyers aren't real people, but they think differently than people that aren't lawyers. And so when lawyers think of creating a solution to a legal issue like this, like access to justice, they think of like these very clear-cut solutions that we know of as lawyers that we can apply to somebody's situation. But the gap that I'm referring to, which is the same gap that comes up in these discussions, is getting the person to understand that it even fits in that category. So I want to go a little deeper into how you do that, because within JusticeBot, I assume that there's some kind of logic that you built into it, or maybe not logic per se in terms of symbolic representation, but generative would probably be very useful in this application, where they give you what they usually give people is a story, which is a very messy jumble of information about all of the stuff going on. And somehow you're extracting pertinent information from that. If you could talk a little bit to that.
No, I think that's a really interesting question. And so the initial JusticeBot, so the core JusticeBot, that is based around logic. And the reason we did was also technical, because we said if we want to give this information, we want to be sure that it's correct, that it can be verified, and that we can look over it and make sure that the information given it makes sense. And so the approach we took here was to use an expert system. It works essentially like a flow chart that people could build, and then it will be implemented in the JusticeBot. And actually, a big part of my research was also developing this platform behind it called the Justice Creator. And that's a platform for building these tools. So it allows the kind of visual drag and drop creation of these logical pathways. And the idea is here that non-technical people as well, like lawyers, can use that to build JusticeBot systems. So that was the core, but I think the more time went, and especially as my PhD progressed, I also saw that there could be ways of enhancing that. And so one of the ways was what I spoke about before with using generative AI to build these pathways. But we also had some other ways of combining the two approaches. And I think having that as the core, having this kind of symbolic, very safe, very accurate approach at the core is also very helpful to adding kind of machine learning and generative AI on the sides. So one approach we took was to build a machine learning algorithm where, well, as you mentioned, people would describe their situation, and then it would connect that to one of the pathways in the JusticeBot. So they would write, for example, I'm very cold, and the system would then suggest to them, well, we think you have a heating issue. You may want to explore with your landlord, you may want to explore if your landlord has failed in any of their obligations. So that way they have an easier way of navigating an interface, but at the same time, if they click that button, they get back to this pathway. And this pathway can then kind of drill down. It's again a very safe approach that we can verify that to make sure that it's accurate and the information makes sense. So we stay in that paradigm, but we also have this kind of generative AI in the sides. And I think especially now after my PhD, like looking at how these two approaches can be combined to create kind of keep the benefits of both is something that's been super exciting to me.
Yeah, and one thing that I was extremely excited to talk with you about is that we do have a lot in common. I mean, we're a generation apart, like the LawDroid platform itself. Because I started it 8 years ago, of course, it has a lot of the classical AI conditional logic stuff with a layer of generative AI over it. And, seeing that the platform that you built has a similar kind of approach in a way is validating, right? It's like, hey, this is, I guess, not a bad idea.
I think so. It's very exciting times as well, I think, because I think a lot of the approaches that worked very well and make a lot of sense in terms of symbolic reasoning and machine learning and such, they're still there and they still work very well. But with the power of generative AI now and large language models, you can really kind of boost them and you can do more things that you couldn't do before, while also having that system that works and that's been working before. So I think that is a very exciting approach, and yeah, I'm very impressed with the work you do as well. So,
and the symbolic part, one of the main concerns that lawyers have had is about hallucination and the fact that it's statistical and it can get things wrong and it's probabilistic determination of what comes next and all that. But the symbolic part can actually act as a counterweight to that in terms of having, knowledge graphed in a certain way so that there's expectations about what subject matter we're actually handling, and then whether or not the response that we're getting is within the scope of that. So it could be that it's actually a good way of addressing lawyers' concerns about generative AI.
Yeah, I agree. I really think so. And I think like looking at the law itself, it often is quite close to symbolic logic, in my opinion. Like there's requirements in there and then there's outcome. And they're very clearly, very logically connected. Like if this requirement is fulfilled, then this outcome is going to happen. For example, if the tenant is frequently late with paying their rent, then the lease can be terminated. So this logic is symbolic logic. Like it's very clear what happens based on the other thing. But those constituent parts, saying like, is the rent frequently late? That is more open-ended reasoning logic. And I think their generative AI can be very powerful because it can do this kind of reasoning, to some extent, look at the world, look at facts, understand how those relates to others. So I'm a big fan of the right tool for the right job. And I think symbolic AI has a place here, and as does generative AI. And in my latest project called Dalma, that's very recent, I'm kind of exploring how they can be interlinked and how they can work together that way.
I was just thinking that I should ask you just to step back from it a couple of steps, because some people that might be listening to what you're describing may not be as familiar with it. What do you mean when you say symbolic AI?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I guess symbolic AI would be AI that's based around logical rules. So, I mean, there's very different ways of doing this as well, but the idea is essentially that many things of the world are represented in terms of symbols, which can be rules, they can be ideas that have relationships, but these they are manipulated essentially in logical ways instead of in these probabilistic ways. So I guess the easiest example would be kind of what I just mentioned. If something is present, then there's a certain result. Like there's a very clear A to B relationship here. Again, for example, if the tenant is frequently late with paying their rent, then the lease shall be terminated. So this encoding this kind of rules or other similar representations in a computer system is what I kind of refer to when I say symbolic AI.
So symbolic AI, we're clearly telling it, if A, then B. Whereas within a machine learning type approach, it might be that we've given the computer a number of examples that show A leading to B, and then we hope that the machine understands that lesson and then associates A with B.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect description, I think. And again, I think both are very complementary approaches, because often we have rules. Like, again, if we have the law, we could just explicitly tell those to the computers, but in other cases, we might not have the rules. For example, what are the rules that say whether an object or an image is an apple or an orange? Like, there's no clear rule here. And you can look at the color or the skin, but all of these things are really hard for computers to understand and need a lot of kind of training. So they're like having images that you give to the computer and you let it figure out the rules for itself. It would be kind of the machine learning approach that's been shown to be very powerful as well.
So one thing I want to touch on, and it might be obvious from some of the things we've been talking about, but we've been getting really into the weeds, and I kind of like to focus on the benefits here, like from a different perspective. So in terms of addressing the access to justice gap with AI, what, like in broad strokes, are ways that AI can attack that problem that heretofore we haven't been able to address?
Good question. I think there's a lot of ways that remain to be discovered as well. But I do think there is this kind of situation where there are legal problems that are very high volume but low complexity. That means there's a lot of them. Many people face them, but they're not very legally complex. And this could be issues like housing issues, like neighborhood issues, like employment issues, and so on. And here it can be, people, again, might not know that they should speak to a lawyer. And if they realize maybe they can't afford it. And that affects, of course, a lot of people that don't have the means to find a lawyer. Or and of course, there's great approaches to overcome that as well, such as legal aid. But I think a lot of studies have shown that there's this huge legal need out there that's not always being served today. So in this situation where the alternative is really for many people not having a lot of information or not having representation, I think there's a lot of steps that can be done with AI that can really help these people in different ways. And I think what we discussed before, like providing legal information, is a really crucial step here. I mean, having access to a good source that tells people, informs them about their legal rights, informs them about the legal status of certain situations, can be super helpful in helping people understand that there's a legal situation going on and that they have certain rights. But I think it can go many other ways than that as well. That's one example. Beyond that, I'm currently very interested in the ability of AI to fill in forms, for example. That's another thing that a lot of processes rely on in the legal system, of course. Like if you want to go to court, you need to fill out a form describing your issue. But beyond that as well, like applying for legal aid or getting certain licenses, there's often these forms involved that can be very confusing for people. So I think that's another area where having some kind of AI that guides people, that supports them in filling out those forms, can be really powerful. And I think there's a lot of interesting research being done there. But then there's all situations where now you have a legal issue, but you still need to solve it, right? And so I've done some research on mediation, where we're looking at, could AI intervene here as well? Maybe it could be part of a kind of platform where people talk to each other and assist them in this communication, assist them in communicating better, more safely, and potentially resolving the disputes. And then there's, of course, the whole, like, we're talking about lay people here, but of course, helping lawyers as well can be an important part of access to justice also, like legal aid clinics. If we can help them be more efficient and help more people, I think that could also be very powerful, because then fewer lawyers could serve more people, which also would increase the number of people that have access to the legal system. So I think there's just so many different ways, and I think it's very exciting. Many of them are being explored, but I think there's many left to discover and to build and evaluate as well. So I think it's very exciting times for that.
It is very exciting, and I'm really glad that you're out there working on it, because you definitely have a mind to tackle this and get the job done. You know, a while back, I was thinking of what is it that lawyers do that's unique. This was back just before I started LawDroid. I saw that there are three pillars of what lawyers do. There's legal documents, legal advice or information, and then court advocacy. There might be more. That's just what occurred to me at the time. And at the time, you know, LegalZoom had definitely tackled legal documentation and automating that. And at that same moment, this is in 2016, you know, Do Not Pay came along to automate appeals of parking tickets. And that was, you know, the first example that I saw of automating legal information. And so what you're just pointing out too is a third pillar with automating like dispute resolution. Lawyers used to jokingly tell me when I would tell them, you know, explain this to them at a conference or something, oh, right, you're going to have a robot walk in with a suitcase and argue in front of the judge. And they weren't really thinking that, no, you could actually end run that whole process by having some kind of online dispute resolution. So it looks like, you know, those are the things that are in play. You have definitely tackled a number of them. And do you mind telling me a little bit more about the dispute resolution part? Is that something that you're investigating right now and researching?
Yeah, sure. So that's a project we've been working on called the LL Mediator. And I think so a lot of these projects, or the approaches I like to take, is like approaches where the lawyer remains in the loop. So it really helps the law, again, the layperson kind of augment their intelligence, or the lawyer be a very powerful tool for them. And I think that's in the LL Mediator, we also very much took that approach. So this was like experimental online dispute resolution platform where we want to see, can GPT-4 and large language models assist in this process? And it does that in different ways. So imagine you're a user, you have some sort of dispute, say you're angry at a friend of yours who you think broke your window. So you enter this mediation platform, this ODR platform, and you start discussing with them. And you tell them, I think you broke my couch. And maybe the other party says, no, I really didn't do that. That was someone else. And so this is great, right? I mean, this is negotiation, and maybe that's enough to resolve disputes. And I think in practice, so at the Cyberjustice Laboratory, they're running a platform called Parlay. And that's shown that negotiation itself can be super powerful, just there. But sometimes maybe that's not enough. Sometimes maybe the parties get annoyed at each other. And then you got to go from there. So let's say in the LL Mediator, one of the parties starts getting really upset and they write something very angry, like, you idiot, I knew it was you, you broke the couch. And they want to send that. But of course, if they do send that, there could be an issue, because at this point, maybe communication breaks down, the other party gets annoyed, it just kind of devolves into this non-productive back and forth. So they did that in the LL Mediator. And what would happen is that kind of a screen pop up saying, hey, we noticed you might be using quite angry language here. So you wrote this, but what about saying it this way instead? And so it does a suggestion based on generative AI saying, for example, in this case, hey, I know we disagree, but I do think it is you that broke the couch, and maybe let's discuss this properly or something. And it does that quite well. Like, it's really good at grasping the context of what the user said, but also understanding which of the parts are inflammatory and kind of reformulating that in a way that retains the context, but doesn't include those words. Again, the user has the choice, right? Like, we don't tell them you have to write this. We're just offering a suggestion, and they can then decide, no, I want to say what I said, or they're like, yeah, actually, that does sound better, or I'm going to write something completely different. So that's one way where it's sent. But let's say that's not enough. Let's say the parties continue fighting, and eventually maybe a mediator wants to come into that platform and support them. And so here, again, we're using large language models to draft a message for the mediator. So once the mediator reads this, sees the conflict, the system will tell them, here's what you could say. And we tried this. We did some disputes. We have a paper coming up actually in Zurich in December called Robots in the Middle that investigates how well the model does this. It turns out it's actually really good at understanding the dispute and drafting a message that kind of addresses some of the questions. And that might be establishing what happened, or it might be calming down the discussion, or it might be offering different solutions. And then, of course, the mediator can again say, so the mediator is still there. It's just as a kind of aid to them to help them be potentially more efficient. They can read this and say like, no, this doesn't make any sense, or they can send that, or they can even give additional instructions to the model. Eventually, I think it could be interesting for certain disputes where maybe they're very small scale disputes, or there's not enough mediators to see if the model could do that by itself. But there, of course, you really need to make sure that it works well, that it doesn't do any harmful outputs, and that it's really fair for the parties. So that's, I think, more looked for the future. But I think these approaches where we help the person, we give them a suggestion, and can already be very powerful today with having that safeguard in place.
That's fantastic. And thanks for making me laugh about that. I mean, like emotional moderation, great application of generative AI, because it can, it could diagnose that sentiment. Secondly, with synthesis, taking in the factual information that's being discussed back and forth and actually synthesize what a response might be for the mediator, which leads to the third, which is speed to action, where the mediator can actually use that synthesized response to edit it and then send it off and not waste as much time to be able to do that. So those three things together, I mean, it makes for a powerful system, which it's not lost on me. It's LLM, LL mediator. That's a cute name for it. So one thing I want to ask you now, after hearing all of this, okay, I can guarantee you that some of the lawyers that are listening are kind of feeling a bit scared. That, like I know on the first time of hearing these capabilities, you think, all right, then what the hell? Like, what's left for me to do? I guess if you could share not thoughts of comfort, but actually like practical ways that lawyers could use these types of tools to their own advantage, what would be some recommendations you would have for them?
Sure. No, I think that's the way I like to look at it. Like, I really do think these are incredibly powerful tools, but I still think they're tools. Like, there's definitely limits with them today, like in terms of hallucinations and such, but they're also very powerful on certain tasks, right? Like giving ideas, drafting things, and so on. So I think for me, what's been very helpful, and I think what I recommend as well, is just to play with them, like to try them out. They're so accessible these days. Like, I think that was this kind of democratization of this AI is kind of one of the most powerful things about the LLMs. But they're also not super easy to use. They do seem very easy when you first interact with it, and the answers you get are very confident and very great. But getting the most out of them, I think, is kind of a skill. It's an acquired skill that you need to have. And I see this often when I look at people interacting with LLMs for the first time, that they pose very short questions, and they do the back and forth, which is already very powerful. But I think to get the most out of them, you really need to give them as much information as possible, for example. So often when I speak to ChatGPT, I will just copy paste all the context I need, like pages and pages of information into the chat window, and then ask it to generate a response based on that. And these kind of skills, you just gotta play with it. You just gotta try it out, see what it can do. And I do think lawyers are actually very well placed to benefit from that, because these models are so general, and we also don't really know what they can do yet and what they can be used for. But I think the lawyers that do run a practice, they know what their time sinks are. They know where they could gain efficiency, and they're also in the good position to verify the information. And that's a big one, of course. Like, some people try to use them like Google to ask really factual questions, and sometimes that works great, but sometimes they do this hallucination, so they make up an answer. And so learning that, like trying that out, getting the intuition for what is a good and a bad use case, I think is really crucial here. I think it is crucial as well for people who want to leverage this efficiently. But I do think there's a great opportunity here for lawyers who, I mean, within, of course, the privacy, the many constraints that could be there, like figuring out a way to leverage this in the good way to help them in their practice, I think is a very promising approach. So definitely something I would encourage people to try out.
Great advice. And I hope that they follow that, because definitely playing with it breeds familiarity, and then familiarity breeds expertise. I do want to ask you a little bit about your professorship. So what, by the way, I think your students are very, very lucky to be learning from you. If you could share a little bit about what you're teaching them.
Sure. So yeah, so I started in April now as an assistant professor at Maastricht University and at this lab called the Law and Tech Lab. And that's also one of those places where lawyers work side by side with engineers. As I mentioned, Professor Gijs van Dijk leads this lab, and there's many other people doing similar research there. And so that involves research. So I'm continuing exploring these LLM questions and looking at what they can do in the law. But teaching is also a big part of that, of course, and supervisions. And so one course we have that I've taught and will continue teaching is called Advanced Legal Analytics. And so that's a course where we essentially teach law students to program. So the idea is that this is such an important tool like programming and AI that law students should learn to use this as well. And so during this course that builds on another course called Legal Analytics, we really try to introduce them to these AI tools, and we teach them actually hands-on Python programming, and we also introduce some LLM stuff on the back end this time. So ChatGPT is nowadays a big part of this course, of course. Like going from being a law student to doing programming is a hard task. Like it is a new world and a lot to learn. But having access to ChatGPT, I think, has proven to be an amazing resource for them to just learn to learn these programming concepts, to ask it to give some initial code, and then to ask it follow-up questions to understand that and to solve that task that we give them. I think that's been a huge boost in terms of what they're able to do. But then also we have actually included LLMs in the course on the backend side. So some of the code they learn to write is to set up a conversation within the program with ChatGPT via this application programmatic interface, this API. And then they can do stuff like legal search or legal question answering, and learn how to do that in code as well. And at the end, we asked them to do a project, looking at some legal data, doing some analysis, and I was super impressed with what the students came up with. So that was really fun to see. And I do think it's the kind of thing also where in the future they could, if they're in legal practice, for example, and they know that they've tried this, they know where they can start. I'm hoping that could be something that's really useful for these students. So yeah.
It's such an exciting time. I kind of wish that my legal career started now versus when it did many years ago. I love the fact that you are working with students and then also doing the research on practical projects that actually go out into the world. It's a great, flywheel that just improves on itself. And so I'm very excited to see what you do in the future. One other thing I'd like to ask you, which is kind of practical advice for anyone who's watching really, is that it sounds like you have a lot going on. You're a professor, you're also doing research, you're also kind of putting things out into the world. How do you keep up to date on the latest that's happening with AI and keep all of this balanced?
Good question. And I think that is one of the challenges in the field now, because stuff is moving so quickly. There's so much new stuff happening all the time that you could do research, and then like a few months later, there's a new model that you need to redo many of the things, or maybe you found something that didn't work well, and then the new model just does that perfectly. So it's very interesting times, and very, very quickly moving. I don't know. I think it's like very individual. For me, I think what helps me is that I'm I think very curious as a person, and I just love this technology as itself, like in a very geeky way. I love playing with the things, and not even just for work, but just seeing what ChatGPT can do, and seeing if I can trick it, or seeing if it can help me with my coding things and so on. So that definitely helps just to play with it. I think is again a great way to learn about these tools. And often I've done something completely unrelated to my work, where I'm just playing with some technology just because I think it's fun. And then I'm like, wait, now I see this overlap. Like now that I've learned this tool, I can also apply it to my work. And a lot of the things that I built, like the JusticeBot, started with just a completely different project that then where I realized this could also be applicable to that problem. I think it's also, on the other hand, like this kind of the opposite. It's also important not to be not to get distracted by what's happening, because there's always stuff that's happening. I think it's important to keep in mind also that we all have our unique perspectives and we all have our unique contributions in itself. And the JusticeBot, for example, was using a symbolic system, and ChatGPT really became big at the end of that. And I was thinking, do I need to change this now? But I realized, no, this is the contribution isn't in the AI, but it's really my contribution as well. Like coming from this legal background and this understanding of that and this thinking about access to justice, like that's really a core of the contribution here, even if it's maybe not using the latest technology. But then, of course, once you have that, you can start adding stuff to it as well. So I don't think you necessarily need to keep up with all the developments. I think just learning something very well, thinking about it in depth, and then seeing where those kind of pieces fit in is often enough, and it's often a very powerful and can be a really good contribution as well.
100% agree with you. I think that there is so much going on. We really need to distill it into actionable intelligence about what works for us with what we're doing. And also the point you made about cross-training. You know, there's a lot of accident and kismet in what happens. Like you play around with something else, or you're curious about something you read. Could be a book on anthropology, and then you go, wait a second, that's kind of interesting. I might use that concept here. So yeah, definitely good advice there. What do you think is next? Like, where do you think this is going? It's happening so fast, like you just said. You know, for example, with Notebook LM, you could even like make instantaneous podcasts over this information. Where do you think we're going in the next year or two?
I don't know. It's a really good question. I think it's very hard to predict. And I think like these models are getting better and better. That's happening. Like they're getting better. They're also getting smaller. So there's of course the big movement towards open source models that you can run on your own computer, which I think especially for the legal profession can be super powerful, because it overcomes a lot of the confidentiality issues of having to send data to another server. I think there's a lot of development on interaction methods as well. So the chat interface is very powerful, of course, and you can do many things in there. But we're also seeing now these voice models. And I just, the past few weeks, I've had the chance to try the advanced voice model by ChatGPT, which allows you this supernatural vocal interaction, which opens a whole new door to this interaction, in my opinion. Like there's many things that are just very convenient to do like that, or people that might not be very comfortable writing that could suddenly use these models as well. So I don't know. I think we'll see. Again, I don't think it's crucial. I think like what we have today is enough to do so many things that we haven't even started thinking about yet. So that's how I like to look at these things. We're exploring these questions, looking at that from the lens of what we have today, and then seeing, oh, now there's other thing. How can we fit that into what I've been doing before is very promising in itself. But of course, I'm always excited to see what happens, and very eager to kind of learn what the next models will be, what they're able to do, and how that can be integrated as well.
I think even if AI stopped right now in its development, we would have at least a 5-year project of unpacking everything that's, become available now. Let me ask you this question. There's a lot of people watching this that I know are probably thinking, oh my God, this is way too much. It's overwhelming. And okay, Hannes, he's excelling at this, but both of his parents were lawyers. His father, introduced him to computers. He was into computers at 11. This is something beyond me. This is too much. I can't do this. What would you have to share with them as some inspiration about that they could do it too?
Sure. And yeah, I mean, of course, I was very lucky to come from the background I did, and I think that did help a lot. On the other hand, I do think I think this has been one of the big changes of this generative AI kind of revolution, is that you don't need to do programming anymore to be able to use the most sophisticated AI there is. I think that's really cool, because when I started my PhD, like there was AI. I mean, sure, it existed. It was already a big thing. But the way you built these systems was usually you would do code. You would do Python coding. You would need to assemble your training data, do a lot of data cleaning, and so on. And that's a very specialized skill, of course. But today, to use really the most powerful AI system out there, you just talk to it. So that's been such a big shift. And I think that really democratizes access to them as well. Because the skills of programming, I mean, it's still helpful, right? Like it helps and you can do certain things, but there's so many things you can do now by just having this kind of very natural interaction with these models. And it's also a separate skill. Like, again, as I said before, learning how these tools work doesn't necessarily overlap with how you used to program machine learning and AI things. So I think it's kind of if now is, in my opinion, the great time to get into it, because there's a kind of whole new field growing of prompt engineering or the best practice in prompting these things. And it's very open, like really anyone can engage it, anyone can try things and see what happens. A lot of it is also comes down to understanding not just how to speak to them, but the answers as well. And again, that's something I think where lawyers can have a really big impact, is that nobody else knows your legal area like you do if you're a lawyer, but you kind of need to know that to understand how well these models work for you, or what they can do or what they can't do. So I think kind of applying this properly to the legal domain really needs people coming from other backgrounds, from different legal fields, or not at all a technical background, to engage with this and to play with these models and to see where that goes.
Absolutely. I mean, the AI itself, the technology itself is democratizing. And as you pointed out with the voice interfaces now, and who knows what comes next, it's going to become that much more approachable and useful for everyone. With that, Hannes, I just want to thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your expertise and knowledge.
Thank you very much for having me, Tom. It was really fun. Great pleasure.
And also for anyone who's listening in and they want to keep in touch with you or keep up to date on what you're working on, what would be the most convenient way for them to do that?
Well, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn, Hannes Westermann, just my name, or just reach out via email. It's hannes.westermann@maastrichtuniversity.nl, but you can find that online or on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, please feel free to reach out. I was interested to connect.
Well, thank you again. And thank you to all of you out there for watching another episode of LawDroid Manifesto. We'll be back next week. See you then. Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.